All right, please give a standing ovation to my friend Thom Powell.
Thank you. Congratulations, Johnny. This is the biggest house I've seen in the western United States. About several hundred, 300 probably anyway out there. Every time I do one of these talks, I swear this is the last time I'm retiring. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want to be a member of any group that would have people like me as members. Sorry, that's Groucho Marx. I didn't make that up. But I really do enjoy these gatherings, not so much for the talking, but I really love the socializing. There's a few tricks that I'd like to explain about how to figure the group out. First of all, if you want to meet a real Bigfoot researcher, they're really easy to identify because they're very nocturnal. So you just hang around in the bar till like they're closing. Last night it was 2 o'clock. The band finally said, "We are out of here." And there's Denise Holt and who else was there? Denise, well, a couple girls. And they were like, where are you going? It's 2 o'clock. We just got here. I go, now that is a Sasquatch researcher. Cindy Rose, I think. So these people earn their stripes. The other thing that I like when Johnny does is he puts my table in the back. You definitely want to be in the back at these talks. And what you do is you stand around back there and you look for the person who has mud on their shoes and missing a button on their flannel shirt. That's the person you want to talk to. I met one fella back there who, let's see, Brian Reed. Where are you, Brian? Are you still in here somewhere? There you see, in the back. And this guy has more sightings to his name than I had baseball cards as a little kid. So a lot of people go, well, you know, I don't believe anybody who has more than one Bigfoot sighting. Well, don't talk to Brian Reed over there because he's got a lot. And he's not the only one. There's actually several people back there. So you really learn some interesting things at these conferences by talking to the people in the back. So that's a really important clue. Also, there's a way to meet girls at these talks. I just figured this out. What you do is find Bob Gimlin, pretend that you're his friend, stand right next to him, and you will meet every girl in this place. A lot of them will like hug you too because I think you're Bob's friend. Now me, I'm a little bit more on the paranormal side, so I'll warn you, this is your last chance to get out of this room. Dave had that one slide of the Three Stooges. Where are you, Dave? Anyway, I want that slide of the Three Stooges. That just reminded me of Joe and Guy and myself doing our Sasquatch research. I was really impressed with Todd's drone. Are you in here, Todd? See, he's flesh and blood. He is like not even in the building right now. But I got a drone too. I didn't bring it. My drone has a name. I call it Wilson. He has 4 legs and it looks like a golden retriever. But when I get home, I'm going to rename him Drone. Did you see Todd had his drone come and land at his feet? My drone does that too. My drone has 2 audio receivers, one on each side of his head, and he has this Bigfoot detector right on the front of his face. Some call it a nose. It works really well. And from my house, I have 1,500 acres upstream that I can sort of wander into, so I go Bigfooting pretty much every night. I take the drone. And it works really well. When there's a Sasquatch around, you can tell because Wilson, the drone, immediately heads for home. So when you look around and like Wilson's gone, you go, oh shit. But it really works. He's an excellent drone. Doesn't need batteries like Todd's. Well, he's got one battery. It lasts 14 years, and then you got to get another drone. But anyway, yeah, I'm paranormal. I try to be nice about it. You know, there was a guy years ago named Eric Beckjord who kind of touted the whole paranormal thing, and he wasn't really very nice about it. So I think he gave paranormal kind of a bad name. I just sort of take it lightly. I laugh at the ideas. I laugh at myself, even though I'm serious about it. But I just don't want to run over somebody's dogma with my karma. So I'll try to be nice about it. Anyway, I could tell these jokes all day. I'm not proud. I'm not tired. But the computer might shut off, so I better get going. Figure about 45 minutes till your next break. My talk is basically, what is Bigfoot? And after 10 years of asking myself that question, I was sort of illuminated by some other people, and they also sort of, one guy in particular, Henry Franzoni, said, I can't tell you what it is, you got to figure it out for yourself, because if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And so what you're going to see in this slideshow is basically what I think I figured out, but I'm not certain of much, but I do have my conclusions. And the first conclusion is, and I told this to a reporter I was talking to last night. There was a guy hanging around out there, and he said, I want to write a story about this talk, but I got to keep it short. I don't have a lot of words. They only give me 200 words. What can I say that doesn't take more than 200 words to say? And I said, oh, that's easy. Bigfoot is fake. You still got 197 words. But it is one of those things that reporters really, they like that concept because they need to keep it short. So that's as short as you can get. Bigfoot is fake. Well, if Bigfoot is fake, how do I know? Well, because that's me in the costume. I know other people said it was them, but no, it was me. I know what you're thinking of, Tom, 1967, you're 59 now, that means you were 11 years old, and it's like, yeah, I know. I was big for my size. I was old for my age. But I was born at a young age, so that works out. Anyway, that's the end of my talk, so thanks for coming. You see, that keeps it short for the, and be sure if you're a reporter, Bigfoot believers, be sure and call them Bigfoot believers, because, nothing could be more insulting than being a Bigfoot believer. So yes, we're all Bigfoot believers. You'll see that in the paper tomorrow. And they'll say, Bigfoot believer admits he was the man in the costume. So there you go. All right, well, anyway, the real question is not what is Bigfoot, but what are Bigfoots? And I really hate the fact that they capitalize Bigfoot, because that misleads a lot of people into thinking there's one. His name is Bigfoot, and he and Elvis, kind of get around. So I like to insist on Bigfoots. I don't even like big feet, because every Bigfoot has 2 big feet. Anyway, I prefer Sasquatch. I like forest people. It's a little clumsy, but we deal a lot with psychics, and one of the things that I ask the psychic is to find out, well, what do they call themselves? And this is the answer I got. They call themselves Nirmana. Anybody ever heard that one? Well, try it out. See what you get. But that's what I got indirectly. Anyway, this believer thing bugs me, but it is kind of fun to ask, what people believe, and it's sort of audience participation. I think a guy did a little of that, or somebody. So here's my audience participation. How many of you believe in Bigfoot? I'm not even sure I do, but okay, that wasn't bad. How many of you believe in UFOs? Surely. Oh, hey, see, and this is always great, because I feel like, okay, I can go there. Just for, to fill it out, how many of you believe in God? Anybody want to go there? All right, see, but, you got to remember, people, that as far as this whole paranormal thing, do you really know what the word paranormal means? it's sort of the opposite of scientific. You can't study it scientifically. That makes it paranormal. It's actually a pretty new word. It's only been in the lexicon for a couple of decades, really. In the Charles Fort day, they didn't use it. They had other words to describe what they were about, Fortean and stuff like that. Anyway, God's paranormal. You can't study it scientifically, but everybody seems to agree it's there. Well, interestingly, one of the things about doing paranormal is if you really even take on something like Bigfoot with a paranormal slant, you really can't end until you have to examine then, well, what is God after all, and does that somehow relate? And I think it actually does. But anyway, paranormal, there it is. You can't study it scientifically. Now, we all know that when you get to places where people are skeptical and trying to be scientific at the same time. Well, Carl Sagan used this line, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So when you're trying to, say, yeah, I'm one of those Bigfoot believers, and they go, well, how do you know? What's your evidence? Well, I got this hair, and they go, well, that's no good, and doesn't test out. Brian Sykes says it's polar bear, so he has a lab coat. He must be right. Anyway, I was reading this book the other day, trying to be well-rounded. It's something on UFOs, and she had a really interesting statement that sort of counters the Carl Sagan one. And when it comes to these paranormal phenomena, the need to study it comes from the fact that, well, it's an extraordinary phenomenon, and therefore it demands an investigation. You can't leave it on the vine just because it's paranormal. If anything, I think in the eyes of the public, all of you people are paranormal. Bigfoot is paranormal in the minds of the general public, but only within the Bigfoot community do you get the distinction being made of paranormal versus not paranormal, scientific, and so on. Well, when it comes to what is Bigfoot, if you're going to be scientific, I think you got to put it all on the table. And here's some of the possibilities, most of the ones I could think of. Maybe they're flesh and blood creatures, maybe they're apes, maybe they're nocturnal people, maybe they're spirits, maybe they're extraterrestrials, ghosts, which aren't the same as spirits, that maybe we're imagining it. Of course, that's what most people kind of go with, and other people, this is one of my favorite ones, Jim Brandon says it's actually a creation of the earth itself. How does that go? Well, the earth is alive, it's called Gaia, stuff like that. I think that it's more than one of those, so I don't think you can really separate them, but of all the websites and web-based groups that there are, this is my favorite one because they have the best name. They're not about Bigfoot, ghosts, or extraterrestrials. They're into, we just want the truth. What is the truth? How can you argue with that? You gotta love the name. All right, well, anyway, in 2003, I wrote this book, and this basically explored the concept of, why Bigfoot creatures must exist. It did suggest that the DNA points in the direction of human. In 2003, that was a pretty radical concept. I think it's gotten a lot of traction since then, not necessarily because of anything I did, but I'm at least relieved that what I said then, and feeling very speculative, has been a little bit more widely embraced than it was now. But when this book first came out, nobody wanted to hear it. Coleman and them just, it's too paranormal, Tom, get it out of here. And now, of course, it's actually, I think, fairly mainstream. So that's how the thinking has changed in 10 or 12 years. I did suggest even here that there does seem to be something extraterrestrial going on. I'm really not sure what, but there it is, and I tried to just make it interesting enough. Since then, I've done 2 more books. This is a novel, and then this is my latest one, where I just go totally down the paranormal path, round the bend, over the mountain, and across the river. So do not read this book as a first book on the subject. It's way too heavy. Start here, start somewhere else. If you've read a bunch of other books, then pick that one up. But otherwise, you're going to end up throwing it at the wall. So just watch out for this one. By the way, Guy Edwards, where are you, Guy? He did that cover. It's pretty slick. If you ever need a person doing artwork for the cover of your Bigfoot book, there's your guy right there. It does great work, and I don't even have a picture of the back. Well, anyway, the problem with that Edges of Science book is this quote right here by this Ezra Pound, a dead writer, and he said, "No man," I paraphrased it, "no person understands a deep book until he or she has seen or lived at least part of the contents." So the whole idea is if you haven't had any experiences with Sasquatch, especially of the slightly paranormal variety, then that's where people, I think, kind of falter with this new book I've written. So I'm going to try to do you a favor and tell you enough about the book that you don't have to buy it. You know, you spent $20-30 to get in here. So as a freebie, I'm going to save you buying the book. If you already bought it after this talk, you can return it. Anyway, so I'm here. I'm the woo. And some of my buddies are this, and we go round and round, and it's really way more fun to have friends who are both, because the cocktail conversation is much more spirited. But of course, my complaint with my paranormal buddies is that they say, you know, Tom, you're really kind of blowing it. You're hurting our chances with science because you're being all paranormal, and that just makes us all look stupid. And so all right, what are you saying? Well, we need some time before you do this paranormal thing so that we can sell science on this concept. And I'm like, all right, how long do you need? Because I'm like 59 and I'm going to die soon. Depending on where you start counting our Sasquatch research years, it was either 1959, if it's Jerry Crew, or Bob and Roger in 1967. Either way, man, you've had 50 years. I'm not holding my breath anymore for this. But I'm just kind of feeling like also there might be, isn't this a free country? Well, even Carl Sagan kind of doesn't really hang science out to dry, but he says, well, we're all kind of known for suppressing unpopular ideas, especially in religion and politics. But he left science out of there, so I stuck it back in. Because I'm sorry, some of my science friends are some of the most, kind of narrow-minded. My mind's made up. Don't confuse me with new facts. Doesn't mean anything to me because I don't have any facts. But anyway, I just feel like here's what I think. Everybody do their own thing, all right? Flesh and blood people investigate it any scientific way that you can swing. I started out real flesh and blood. I spent years with cameras and collecting hair, and it all started with Alan and April. Where are you guys? I think back there. I'm going to point them at with my laser beam, those two. They sort of drug me down the paranormal path, at least in the beginning. When it comes to paranormal, I think sometimes we lump a bunch of stuff in there that should not be in there. My feeling is that extraterrestrial is not paranormal. I'm an astronomy teacher. I have the most awful job in the world. I teach 8th graders, have for 30 years, and I teach astronomy. And it is amazing how different astronomy has become in the 30 years. Space has gotten a lot smaller. That is to say, we understand what's going on in space a lot better, and the idea that we're somehow connected with what goes on in outer space is scientifically indisputable. But I'm saying, part of what seems to manifest itself on Earth has its origins somewhere else. And I don't think that's necessarily paranormal because, the idea that planets and such exist elsewhere, I think is actually hard science at this stage of the game. So even the word paranormal is sometimes a slippery slope. But, my idea is just paranormal or flesh and blood, just do your own thing. And then as somebody suggested, share out at the end of the day. I think Todd was the one who said, but we all need to share what we're getting. And so, there you go. Computer guy. It's doing funny things. I knew it would. Sound guy, you know how to make it go back on? Oh, wait, here we go. So it... Can you make it start the slideshow from the same place? Do you know how to do that? All right. Anyway, so my approach is not seen by sane as everybody, being that I have used things like sensitives, I guess they sometimes call themselves. Not hypnotists, but Tish, are you back there? What? Mediums, thank you. I think sensitive psychics, although sometimes that doesn't always have a flattering connotation. Well, anyway, when it comes to paranormal, the first thing I want to do, if we can get the slide back up right here, is I want to talk about just a few people in the old days who wrote books that should be sort of, well, let's see if we can scroll through it. All right. All right. The first guy is, wait for it, right here. Thank you very much. Anybody want to guess? Anybody know who that is? This is a paranormal quiz. Yes. That is Stephen Greer. Very good. You win a glass of water. This is Stephen Greer's thing. He's very interested in extraterrestrials. He feels that you can meditate them in. And he also feels, brace yourself for a shock here, that the government has more information than they're sharing. I know, knock me over with a feather. So his thing is the Disclosure Project. He wants them to cough up the news. Good luck with that, Stephen. All right, which one? Who's this? You can do this. Going once, going twice. That's Richard Gere. There's your clue. Who? Keel. Very good. Who said that? Raise your hand. Glass of water. Dave, way to go. All right, that's John Keel, and John Keel wrote this book, which was made into a movie, Mothman Prophecies, and he talked about various phenomenon, and he lumped the hairy beings in with the UFOs and the other, things, including the Men in Black. And the Men in Black aren't necessarily the government. He's saying the Men in Black are actually ETs in, civvies. And they dress sort of clumsy, but when you study this stuff, you find that something is studying you. And that was what John Keel found, and what's interesting is I've run into this with the Sasquatch people in some cases too. And John Keel also said that there's somebody's playing games with us, that a lot of what we're experiencing out there in the paranormal world is they're tricking us, they're messing with our heads. Interesting, we'll get back to it. I won't even try to ask you to figure out this one. This guy was into the Loch Ness Monster in the 30s, Ted Holliday, and he died before his book was published, so his buddy Colin Wilson published it posthumously. What's interesting about what this guy was finding in the 1930s, they were trying to get pictures of Loch Ness Monsters, and they found that, kind of like Bigfoot, they get around, there's not just one. And they found that it's just one of a host of strange beings. And one of the most interesting things, because I'd had this with the cameras, is that he was finding in the 30s with completely mechanical, not electric cameras, that he would have weird camera failures right when the thing showed up. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's the 1930s, and that really struck a nerve with me, because I had seen so many times when the camera was messed with but not stolen, the camera was covered up, the trails are blocked, sometimes the camera's pulled down. Alan, does this sound familiar back there? This was all at his house, some of it anyway. Weird that even without electronics, you can have mechanical failures that are somehow seen by this guy as attributable to the fact that he's studying this phenomenon. Guy already told you about this guy. This is Charles Fort. He is the big daddy. He is the original. He is the first guy. And interestingly, in the 1930s, he was saying not only that there's UFOs, but people are being abducted and put back. And wow, for the 1930s, that's pretty bold stuff. Charles Fort also had a sense of humor, and one of the things he said was science has established preposterousness. So I promised I'd be nice, but I'm a science teacher, so I can beat up myself. Anyway, Charles Fort said, science of today, superstition of tomorrow. See, they did not use the word paranormal. They talked about superstition, but in this day and age, you would drop the word paranormal in there. But that word basically meant the same thing before paranormal, as I said, was in the lexicon. Well, like I said, this is how things have changed. Yesterday's paranormal is today's science. Here's a great example. When I was teaching astronomy in the 80s, we told the kids that we're the only solar system that is known. And then in the 90s, the first star outside of the sun to have planets was Vega, 54 light years away. And now, in a few short years, scientists are confidently telling us that all stars have planets, and there's 100 billion stars in the Milky Way alone. You don't even want to think about going to other galaxies. There's just a ton of stars out there, and they all got planets. That is totally messed up. Even as recently as November 12th, so last week or beginning of this week, they're announcing that they found a planet exactly the size of the Earth. It is actually more like Venus than the Earth in terms of its temperature ranges and so on and so forth. But, it's amazing how close this is, 39 light years away. Alpha Centauri, 4.6 light years away. And they think they got planets around Alpha Centauri too. So, the idea that we got neighbors in space, I think, is really not very much of a stretch at all anymore, but times have changed hugely since I've been standing in front of 8th graders teaching astronomy. This is a great book if you can ever find it, but it's out of print, and the last time I saw one on the internet it was $150. And this is the guy who's saying that Earth is alive, that these creatures emanate from the Earth. The Saskies are in some form manifestations of the Earth's living spirit. I have trouble wrapping my head around how that exactly goes. It's hard for me to imagine a planet being somehow alive, but that's his premise, and he does raise some rather profound ideas, and one of them that I wrote about in the new book is these mysterious mounds, and the type locality for mysterious mounds worldwide is just south of Olympia, Washington. It's on your way out of here, the Little Rock exit, and it's called the Mima Mounds. Mima is a town that used to be there. Now it's a Weyerhaeuser tree farm, and they bulldozed a bunch of these mounds, and it turns out they're really fertile soil for growing pretty much anything, which is why Weyerhaeuser is now, owns what used to be the town of Mima. And anyway, all throughout the world, they are now called Mima Mounds, after that little town right there on the Little Rock exit, I-5. Definitely got to stop in there, and I tried to treat it in a chapter. Anyway, so I promised I'd give you enough of a sense about the book that you didn't have to buy it. Thank you, Guy Edwards, for the pretty cover. And I showed you this already, but this is basically my statement that I decided, without any money or scientific help, I was going to do my own extraordinary investigation because no one else was. This was in 2000, and that led me to the creation of my book, which is basically a summary of all these books. So here is about, 7 books that you now don't have to buy, because they're all sort of rolled into my book, but you can see how each of those refers to something that I've sort of already hinted at. Now, when it comes to paranormal phenomena, here's one of the overarching thoughts, and I won't beat around the bush. These are all paranormal topics, you might say. And here we are dealing with one of them, but that paranormal talk that Johnny's advertising that's going to happen here in a couple of weeks or months, I got to tell you, those are really worth going to, because you sit down with all these paranormal people and you hear what they're getting and how they research their topic, and the similarities are really, in some cases, pretty startling, that they're finding the same stuff that we're finding in the Sasquatch thing. So sometimes we in the Sasquatch biz tend to have our blinders on a little too much, I think, to what other people are getting and what that implies about what it is we're trying to study. So here are about 10 bullet points that represent things that are reported, not necessarily in all cases by all of these people, but these different things at least have some of these things in common. So, as I said before, some of the people who are doing the lake monsters have had the camera failures. Missing time is one that some of the people have in the Sasquatch game, but it's more commonly associated with people who have the UFO experiences. And don't take pictures of this. This is classified information. I can get in trouble with my employer if they see me talking about this. Anyway, you just get, well, here's one that I think pervades almost every one of these paranormal topics, is that you just get this weird heebie-jeebies, and everybody who's had a Bigfoot encounter, I think, knows what, your hair stands up on your arms. You just, no matter how much you've rehearsed the situation, what I'm going to do when I see Bigfoot, and all you can do is turn and run. And your feet are running before you even made the decision to run. It just undoes you. And when this happens, you just kick yourself. Why did I do that? Why didn't I stand my ground? And it just seems that there is something with many of these topics which makes it very difficult to do what you intellectually think you ought to do. And then this is a fascinating one, crop circles, and they have a whole bunch of this stuff going on in the study of all things crop circles. And when I went to one of these conferences on all the paranormal subjects, there was a crop circle person there from England. And I said, "Are you guys serious about that?" And he's like, "Oh man, you have no idea how much we study this." He said, "I don't come to the Northwest and tell you there's no Bigfoot, because I don't know. I don't live here. But I wouldn't go to Scotland and tell that guy there's no Loch Ness Monster." And the guy from Scotland is sitting right there, and he said, "There's a lot more sightings than make the news. A lot more. There are credible sightings of a Loch Ness Monster walking across the road and going into the water." And it's like, okay, I did not know that. It all then brings us to this image I have, the big tent, and the big tent is science, and Bigfoot is not in the big tent right now, and we want Bigfoot to be in there, and darn it, they're not. Anyway, this drawing and many others was done by Alicia Bateman, who is somewhere back there. There you are. And John is her support system. Where's John Pickering? Where are you, John? Oh, he's too flesh and blood. He's not here either. There. Oh, back there. All right, so here is the problem that I'm having, and that is I tried to be scientific, and it kind of doesn't work for one important reason, and that is I found that the creatures that I think, trying to get the skinny on were much more intelligent than I realized. And I think the problem is, and I think that CIA knows this, you can't do intelligent gathering on something that's as smart as you are, and you can't do science, on something that's intelligent and something that is deliberately staying rogue, so that is hidden. And it's clear, at least to me, that with the Sasquatch thing, they're staying hidden, and they are resolute about staying hidden. And this is, all of a sudden, science begins to break down. You can't do scientific analyses other than, on spoor, things that they leave behind, but you just can't study the phenomenon the way you'd like. Now, intelligence gathering, on the other hand, basically means you can take any story, rumor, or hearsay information and save it. You don't necessarily build a house around it, but it does become a sticky note on the wall. And what you're doing, what I think intelligence gatherers, intel people are doing, is they're putting the sticky notes on the wall, and they stand back and go, all right, this is what it's saying. If I look at all these bits of unverifiable information, it all says that Osama bin Laden is in that house in Babadajad or wherever. And you act on that, but you're not certain of your information. If you got 80% certainty, you're doing great. That's how the intelligence game works. And I think that has validity with these paranormal subjects, because if you got uncertain pieces of information, I would not throw those away. You save everything and just see what patterns it seems to point to. Well, so all of a sudden, I realized that I started out doing this when I started going to Alan and April's house and checking out the situation that they had going on near Mount Rainier. I was going to gather evidence. But after pulling out the camcorder in a very untimely moment and having the phenomenon completely stop at that point, I started to realize that, man, I'm not going to get the evidence that I want. So I can sort of retrench, do things a little differently, and since about 2004 or 5, I've been really just pursuing this. I'm not trying for evidence because I know that I cannot provide evidence as science requires. But I can learn a whole bunch about the creatures, and maybe I can help design a scientific experiment down the road. But I think what I'm doing now is this level of pre-science where I'm just trying to get understanding, and once understanding emerges, then maybe a scientific evidence will be implied, but don't hold your breath. Anyway, here is one idea that has emerged, and it's it was laughable to me at first. I believed what Peter Burns said. No one sees a Bigfoot more than once. They're just too scarce. And then I met this guy, several of them, Alan and April, first of all, at their house, and then Jim Henry. You're around here somewhere, Jim. I saw you. There he is. Wake up, Jim. So there's people who have multiple sightings. And Jim's one of those guys, and so I did a chapter on Jim, and that's his buddy Paul Graves who introduced me. So are there people who see multiple Sasquatches or see the same Sasquatch multiple times? There's one, and he's in the room, and he's not the only one. Who was the one I mentioned before, Brian. He's got a lot of sightings to his credit. Then Toby, who's also back there in the corner somewhere, called me up one day and said, "We found 100 tracks. Come help me out." And I was like, "Toby, I'm doing the science fair today. Call Cliff. He's in town." So Cliff went down there and helped him pour a bunch. I went down the day after and helped pour the rest. And we found this long string of tracks. And that was really cool. We had our not so scientific evidence, but what was more interesting is these guys, especially on Todd's encouragement, said, "All right, well, we think they're around. I mean, we got all this physical evidence. Let's go beat the bushes and see what we get." And then that's when they had this, what we call Paranormal Sunday. They went out a couple nights later in the woods nearby here, and oh man, did it go on. I could talk for a long time. I'm not gonna read the chapter in somebody else's book. Anyway, very gorgeous picture that Alicia drew to represent, the idea of these tracks on the edge of the reservoir. And we found ourselves wondering, well, what the hell they were doing around this reservoir. Well, one thing that was weird was there was a huge, thousands of geese on the other side of the reservoir, and it was just this incredible racket. And then when the geese finally decided, for whatever reason, to all take to the wing at once, it was this riot of honking and wing beats and splashes of their pattering feet, and it was just one of those nature moments that was right out of Marlon Perkins Mutual of Omaha. Do they still have that show? I don't think they do. I could make those old references. This crowd kind of gets it. Looks like a Flomax commercial out there. Anyway, here we are at the scene of the crime. There's Guy, there's Toby. Beth couldn't be with us today. And it all culminated with this gifting that they were doing. And they were putting things out in the woods. And for the benefit of Todd's son, lo and behold, appears this pair of sneakers. Just when the kid was talking to Dad about, I need some sneakers for basketball practice starting up, and here these sneakers appear. It was the craziest thing. So what fun stuff, if you leave yourself open to it. Well, then I get into this idea of communication, and it starts with this skookum cast, this thing that we found in the meadow, the skookum meadow. And we were all excited about this impression in the ground, and we cast it in plaster, and it was on TV. So, that was great, but what was interesting was the paranormal undertones of this oh-so-scientific expedition that we're on, and that is I had learned from Alan and April that the creatures tend to hang around at a lot closer quarters than we realize. And so one night I was trying to get the group to face up to our lack of evidence after a week in the woods, and I said, well, let's try something different. Let's buddy up to them. Let's do something nice. Let's quit sneaking around, setting traps and doing tricks. Let's just cards on the table. And to Derek Randall's credit, he listened and said, all right, well, we've tried it our way all week. You will try it your stupid way, Tom. And so they got busy and put out all these gifts all over the place, and that's when we got the impression. So I think it was a real turning point for me as far as going, dang, this paranormal stuff kind of works. Basically, I was involved with BFRO for a long time before I got kicked out for the unforgivable sin of writing a book. No one reads books. We want everything to be on the internet. But then I met, through BFRO, Alan and April Hoyt. I won't put my pointer at them. And they live near Onalaska, Washington, or used to. And we set trail cams out in their woods. And for 2 years, we had a progression of cameras, both still camera and video, out in their woods. And, it's not old growth or anything. It's thoroughly logged. It's near Mount Rainier. And the whole reason I was interested is I knew that Mount Rainier is one of the absolute hottest hotspots you can find, but not by any means the only one. So we set these cameras out, and this is the kind of lousy image that we were getting in 2000, 2001, when these early webcams were just first coming online. The equipment is way better now. It's way cheaper now. But I've also sort of given up on the camera thing. But in those days, we were particularly interested in an outdoor freezer like this one. This is in my property, but it was an outdoor freezer like this that was being hit. It was being raided, and the ice cream bars weren't being taken, just the side of a pig or a bag of smelt. Anybody know what smelt are? There's like these little oily fish that nobody eats, but they are excellent food source, high in unsaturated fats and so on. Well, these things were disappearing out of the freezer. So BFRO to the rescue. I put a camera on the fridge and everything stopped. And then the activity shifted, and Alan calls up and says, Tom, it's out in the woods now. And so we move the camera to the woods, and the freezer gets hit again. And it's like, all right, what is going on here? I mean, I'm just saying this to try to convince you. I did the flesh and blood thing for a long time, put a lot of cameras in the woods, including these video cameras. And I guess it's not as stealth as I would have liked it to be, but I'm just hoping Sasquatch think, well, birdhouses could have power, They might want lights. But anyway, that's a camera, and that's an infrared illuminator, which is why the side of the birdhouse had to be off. But so using this contraption, we sat, probably close to 2 years, and finally I was close to giving up, and then I met these people through Ray Crow, who shifted my paradigm. And one of them, Joe, already, let's see, somebody was talking about Rick Snyder, lived up in Ripplebrook. We were talking about him earlier today, and he said, I got communication. And this is where Ray Crow, bless his soul, was one of the original, I'm not holding any secrets. I don't have time to investigate this stuff. Tom, you want to talk to this guy? Talk to him. So I was, impressed that here's this guy who's willing to stand up and go, I got a psychic connection with the Sasquatch, just like Lapsaritis has always said. So I thought, I wasn't too sure I wanted to believe it, but I knew who could verify it. So I went right to Alan and April and said, have you ever had this stuff go on? He says he can communicate with him. And Alan looked at April, and April looked at Alan, and they said, yeah, actually, we have had some of that. Well, I was thunderstruck. I almost fell off my chair. I'm like, I've been coming here 2 years, and you've never told me that you think you have communication? And they said, of course, we didn't want you to think we were crazy. You're BFRO. And I'm, all right, I get it. You're not crazy. So what else is going on? And they said, well, our daughter gets it the most, but sometimes they wake her up and say, come out and play. One time, April said she was walking in the forest and she heard this statement. And she was smoking a cigarette and had some things on her mind, but all of a sudden, this statement comes out of nowhere and says, quit trying to trick us. And when she told me that, I knew exactly what she's talking about. We had cameras on the site for 2 years. Every time we put the camera here, the activity goes to there. Put the camera there, activity goes to there. And there it was. And it's like, oh my God, I've been suspecting this all along. And then she said the second thing they said is, oh, and by the way, don't smoke those cigarettes. They're bad for you. Now, I know whenever I tell people this, the first thing they say is, so what language were they using? And I asked this to April, and April said, well, there's only one language I speak, and that's English, so yeah, it's English. But she said, I mean, I heard it, and I looked around like, who said that? And it turns out that this is not actually something that's never happened before. It's pretty rare, but you do get people who are reporting this. And what I found is my tendency would have been to dismiss Rick Snyder as crazy, but he had the Joe Beelart seal of approval. And that, I think, is a very important thing because it saved me a lot of time having to vet this guy. And so here's one of my most important points, and that's when it comes to this Bigfoot research, you definitely need to work in teams, and there's nothing more valuable than another experienced person who can sort of help you with, yes, this person, we've checked him out, you don't have to worry as much, we're satisfied. And it's like, that's good enough for me. So when I found another one of these guys, I was able to, once again, talk to other people, and they say, yeah, he's the real deal. So this is where other researchers, I think, at this stage, for me, are more valuable than witnesses. Because a researcher who's talked to a bunch of these people, that's who I want to talk to. It takes too much time for me to interview every person who say, I saw Bigfoot run across the road, and those don't usually help out your knowledge of the situation that much. So experience does matter, and certainly when it came to being able to verify this wild claim with people who I trusted by then, and then they say, yeah, we get that too. It's like, all right, let's go with this. All of a sudden, bing, my scientific experiment occurred to me. We are going to try to use communication. And this other guy surfaced once again from Ray Crow, and he said, I know, I got the communication. And so I said, perfect, Steve, here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask for 3 things. I want you to ask for a really good print. I want you to ask for a picture. And I want you to ask for a bone. And Steve looked at me and said, boy, you don't want much, do you? And I'm like, well, just ask, Steve. And he said, all right. And he asked, and I didn't tell Alan that I was doing any of this, and I didn't tell Steve where Alan lived, but I sort of gave Steve a rough outline of the area and didn't give him any specifics so that Steve couldn't be accused of planting any evidence. Within 2 weeks of Steve asking, in whatever meditative trance he uses to ask, Alan called me up and said, we found this huge impression in our horse paddock that looks for all the world like one of these like the Skookum cast. It's like another Skookum cast. And I was like, wow, I can't believe it. Then Alan calls me up a few weeks later and says, we got a really good picture on our camera. And I'm like, after 2 years, and I didn't tell Alan that Steve Fredericks was asking for pictures. And then a couple weeks after that, Alan informs me that they found a bone. So I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Anyway, the chapter is called the Coconut Telegraph, and it basically references this long-distance communication. And my buddy back there, Bob Faust, who is not just a devotee of this type of communication, but has actually studied it under shamans in places like Hawaii and Ecuador, and he says they have to have communication. The Sasquatch, they're creatures of the wilderness. They have to have a long-distance type of communication. They just have to. And the idea of can we access it is actually not that big of a stretch. Lots of science has been done about telepathy, and you can read books books about it, and one of them that's particularly good as far as authors is this guy, Rupert Sheldrake. He's an English dude, and he talks about the sense of being stared at, which is this book right here, and he says, telepathy, hell yes. So, we really tried to work that angle, and here is the picture, one of the not very great pictures we got. So this is the one that had Alan call me up, Tom, we got a picture, and I didn't tell him that only a couple of weeks before, Steve Fredericks had asked for a picture. Now, the picture with our lousy, webcam shows basically this shadowy subject moving across the screen, so it's looped. And obviously, that ain't proof of nothing. There's way better blob squatches on the internet than that right now. But that was the best we got after 2 years of work. And the odd thing was the coincidence with this request for a picture. And that was kind of like the impression that was found in their paddock, and we did cast it, just like the Skookum cast. I found then that no one wanted to see it. Matt Moneymaker was particularly disdainful. He was like, Tom, we haven't even sold one Skookum cast. We do not need another one. And I think Matt was inwardly a little suspicious that I was somehow wanting to be a bigger player in the scene, and so I contrived this cast, so that I could have one too, or something like that. So even today, this thing sits in my garage, whatever it is, we cast it, and no one wants to see it. I get that. This is the bone that we got, and this was probably the most fascinating thing of all. I took it to now deceased wildlife biologist Leroy Fish, and he said, that is a bird bone. There it is, and you can see it's really thick and really porous and light, and that's what made him think it was a bird bone, and it looked for all the world like a concave coffee saucer. And after a lot of research, I found that it was an emu, a breastbone of an emu. And I asked Ellen, any emus around your neighborhood? He says, yeah, well, my dad raises emus. He's about 5 miles away. How did the emu bone get from there to here? Well, I don't know. Coyotes, I don't know. Things could carry it around. I finally went and told Steve Fredericks, that thing I asked you to do? Well, I never told you, but we got a bone. And he said, oh, well, let's see it. And I showed it to him, and he said, that's not a Sasquatch bone. And I said, I know, Steve. I thought maybe you could help me with that. And he thought for a minute, and then he hit himself on the forehead, and he said, you know what? I never actually asked for a Sasquatch bone. I asked for a bone. And so it's like, wow, another indication that Sasquatch have a sense of humor. They're working us, just like John Keel said. They know, it's a pretty darn arrogant thing to ask, will you please dig up one of your relatives and give us part of them? A pretty rude thing to ask. And Steve felt that at the time, I said, they didn't seem very interested in your request, but I asked. And so this is the bone we got, and I still have it. And like I say, I really think it's an indication of not just intelligence, but a sense of humor on their part. So what do? We were talking about this in the lobby. How do you leave? Should you leave steak? You leave apple pie? Well, if you're camping, I wouldn't leave food out. You might bring the wrong wildlife closer to your camp. You don't need to leave food. The things aren't starving. Food is fine, but maybe they'll take it, maybe they won't. One Native American said, don't put it on the ground. That's an insult. At least put it on a stump. Whoops. Wish you'd told me that before. While I was hiking at Point Deception up on the very tip of the Olympic Peninsula, I was walking down a trail and I was finding these leaves with little things that are either bug, munching or faces. And so I started leaving these things around my property. I thought, that's perfect. And I started getting things like that back. So I'm here to tell you that here is something you can do. Doesn't cost anything. But if you're in one of these areas and you think the Sasky might be around, this is the kind of stuff you do by way of game playing. And it's interesting how often you get some sort of similar acknowledgement, something that you obviously cannot present to science, but it is the subtle indication that something is messing with you. And I think that is maybe the easiest thing to obtain is this kind of back and forth dialogue of action. So by all means, try things like that. if you're sort of wondering about Sasquatch in your neighborhood. Then, as strange as it gets, are, for instance, the guy who dug up a grave in Ohio, Ron Lewis, and he said, "I will never do that again." He had an extremely bad night that night, and they did not finish digging up the grave, and the next day they went back and they put every stone back, and they said, "We are never touching that thing again." We never got to the bones, but we had really bad nights. Basically, some sort of Sasquatch/ghost appeared in both of their bedrooms, different places in Maple Heights, Ohio, and it scared the crap out of them, and they said, "Do not ever mess with a Sasquatch grave." So one of the big questions, everybody always says, "Where's the bones?" And the answer is probably buried, especially if they're intelligent Native American style creatures. They don't leave their buddies face down in the dirt to die. They take them off, they give them a proper burial, and if you ever find one of these stone cairns in the middle of the woods, I would leave it alone. Lapsaritis, I mentioned him before. He gave me 4 photos. Since I didn't have any good pictures of Bigfoot to show you people, Lapsaritis gave me 4. Here's one, 1936, and basically Lapsaritis is saying, yes, they are interdimensional creatures, and here is a good example. These guys were having their taken pictures with the old Brownie camera in 1936, and this thing shows up in the back of the picture. They got photobombed by Bigfoot in 1936. And that ain't bad. You know, as blob squatches go, that's decent. Here's another cute one. This gal in Arkansas, 2014, so not very long ago, heard them banging on the outside of her trailer. She lived in a double wide or something that you see there. She ran out to take a picture, and this is what she got. You know, it'd probably be better without the lights, but you're basically looking at this form right here. And she felt that it was, you know, half visible and half something else. So interdimensional, whatever. Here's an ancient one running, according to Lapsaritis. More of your typical blob squatch, but not bad. This person, I think, saw the thing and tried to take a picture. This person saw it crossing, this one was, Butchart Gardens, place up there in Victoria, and this guy's taking a picture of the pretty flowers at Butchart Gardens, and when he went home and developed his picture, here's the Sasky also checking out the flowers. So the point is that there's lots of people who say that these things can move through your world, that they can watch you, they can hear you when you're not aware of it. And this is kind of harkens back to the whole thing that happened to us at Skookum Meadows. I swear that while I was telling the guys, try to buddy up to these things, you're not doing a good job. You know, my suggestion was they could be listening to us right now. You know, that's what we're getting sometimes at Allen and April's. So they can be there and you can't see them. I'm fairly certain of that. I don't know whether they're able to just unplug some of the synapses in your brain or whether they really go invisible. I really don't know. I tend to think they're just unplugging parts of your brain. That seems like an easier trick. Shamans can do that kind of stuff. Here's a person who saw one crossing the river, and they pulled out a camera to try to take a picture of it, and according to what she describes, it was dematerializing as she was taking the picture. So what you see there is a Sasquatch that's half there, half not there, and a second later, it wasn't there at all. So I've talked to a couple people today, said, I saw it disappear. All right, you're not alone. If you're crazy, so are a lot of others of us. Anyway, and then it gets into this portal thing, and if you've heard this Matthew Johnson man, he's all about portals, and I don't doubt for a minute that they're there, and if you ever see something in the woods that looks like that, do not mess with it. Do not go toward that thing. They are, I think, rather dangerous. Polites has these books about people who disappear, and I don't know what percentage of the time they experience something like this before they disappear, but I have talked to people who said, oh man, I interacted with that thing and I almost didn't come back. So that's another chapter, and it refers to this particular area, which isn't too far away from here, Skamania County, Washington, and that is the big lava beds, and a teacher who works across the hall, straight across the hall from my classroom, her boyfriend disappeared there, never seen again. And it is one of, these Polites kind of things. And so we asked the psychics, Kathleen Odom, a gal who lives down on the Applegate, would you please ask what happened to Chris Zitzowitz, the missing guy? and she tried to log on to the Coconut Telegraph, and it didn't take her very long when she had a picture of the guy and some specifics of his location, and she said, I asked the Sasquatch people, and they said, wasn't us. She said, what do you mean? And they said, we tried to warn him, but he went with them anyway. And she said, who? And she said, the green ones. The Saskies said that the green ones took him. So I went to Polites and said, who are the green ones? And Polites said, that would be the reptilians. So do your UFO homework. They're sort of one of the ET, members of the ET community, I guess. Anyway, so that's kind of the stuff that I didn't hesitate to take on. I looked into abductees. I found one in, a parent of one of my students came to me at the science fair and said, I'm an abductee. And she told me her whole story. It was fascinating. And the most interesting part is that her story was completely vetted by this researcher from Boston, Walter Webb. And he worked in Hayden Planetarium, same guy, place where Tyson, what's his name? There's Carl Sagan replacement. Neil deGrasse Tyson, thank you very much. He works at the Hayden Planetarium. And this guy worked there prior. And he vetted this one person, and he said this is the best abductee case in history. And he wrote it all in a book, and I met this person because she's the parent of a student in my class. So fascinating. There's a chapter in there about that, and basically what it all suggests. That basically, I won't beat around the bush, ETs come and go from our world. And the Saskies seem to say things like, yeah, we know them. And we don't like them, because when they show up, we get put to work. So one line of thinking is the Sasquatch are foot soldiers for the ETs, and the phenomena intersect underground, just like some of these guys are saying. And so this is the idea of down the rabbit hole. To me, interdimensional could mean these portals and things, but subterranean might be another way of looking at another dimension. In other words, for us that live on the surface of the earth, is something operating subterranean. That is essentially another dimension. It's not a dimension that we inhabit, but there are, you can be underground and not in the molten parts of the earth. And this is what I get from a lot of tribal people, and even some Sasquatch researchers who I hold in high esteem. Henry Franzoni says they emanate from underground hideouts, big ones, and interestingly, a lot of the ET people say the same thing. So these are the kinds of overlaps you get when you look at different paranormal phenomena, and that's, I think, why I'm trying to say, look at all the paranormal phenomena, and you might see some patterns that you didn't expect to find. And this is the guy, Jim Brandon, who talks about the Mima Mounds and other mound fields as some sort of indication of something that's going on subterranean. I think there's a lot to that. It's a really long story, but I would really recommend that any of you, on your way out of here, find the Little Rock exit on I-5, check these bad boys out for yourself, and you tell me how those things got there. It is really interesting, and this is what Brandon also points out, is that there's other mound fields all over the United States. And the one that really put a chill in me, because I knew this area really well, because that's a Sasquatch hotspot, Lafleur County, and darn it, they got the mounds. So I just refuse to believe that it's a coincidence that the mound fields occur in coincidence with the Sasquatch activity. You know, some people say coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. So, yeah. The coincidences. The mounds actually occur all over the world. This is a mound field in Kazakhstan, which was just discovered not too long ago, or just realized, and it was seen from the air, and it almost looks like a crop circle, and to me that looks like a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional pyramid. Anyway, that's where I start to go, all right, well, if I'm going to go down the paranormal rabbit hole, I got to roll it all up. I got to try to unify these things. So here goes. You know, we do get messed with by beings from elsewhere in the galaxy. And crop circles are definitely a indication of this coming and going. And if you talk to the crop circle people, oh my God, you would not believe. But there are people who go, nah, come on. Conspiracy theories, the crop circles are all fake. Well, I will say that there are people who have surfaced lately, these deathbed confession type people who say, I worked for the RAF and I remember paying people to fake crop circles as a means of taking that subject down. And this is important, I think, because in the Bigfoot game, people say the same thing. The truth is being withheld. Sasquatch people are being made to look stupid in order to keep the phenomenon from getting traction. This happens in other paranormal pursuits, that the subject is taken down, and this is a fake crop circle. That is a fake crop circle. In other words, the two guys with the board could make that. That's baloney. That is not a fake crop circle. People with a board and a rope did not make that, and people with a board and a rope did not make that. That's the largest and one of the most complicated crop circles ever, and you ask these crop circle people, what is it saying? And they're saying it's ETs, and there's messages in these things, and you can decode them. So anyway, that's kind of where it all goes. They know each other I'm not certain of it, but it is my suspicion, and it is as a point that I think needs to stay on the table as a way of explaining some of the anomalous data that we run across. I even ran into a person who said while they had been abducted, there were all these different creatures on board, and one of them was this big hairy one that looked for all the world like a Sasquatch, and he was reading a newspaper. And it's like, well, geez, I hope he doesn't read the newspaper we get in Portland. We got this thing called the Oregonian, and it's awful. All they talk about is legal weed and teachers who get overly rich pensions. So, I hope they're reading the paper, but I just hope they're not reading our newspaper. Anyway, so here's some things that I think are conclusions. All stars have planets. There's more than one kind of ET. These are different kinds of ETs. And there is one kind of ET that people sometimes describe, which bears a striking similarity to the Sasky. And I think that they do have interactions with each other. And so by way of summary points, this guy is saying, ET and Sasquatch, the overlap actually goes back for over a century. That there are people who see both in interaction with each other. It's just a sighting, it's just somebody's story, but there are more of these stories than you might suppose. But they're basically saying, yes, the two do interact. My experimental conclusion, just like Scott Nelson, yes, they got language, and if they got language, why can't we figure out what it is? And if they got language, they might have other things like telepathy at their disposal, and I think they do. And I think any rather intelligent person can do telepathy, and I know that the people who are telepaths say everybody can do it, you just have to cultivate it in yourself, but it is something that we all got, and I think that the Sasquatch, therefore, I'm not wasting any more time with cameras. If other people want to, I encourage that. I can't wait to hear. I wish them luck, but I just feel like I'm not going there anymore. But as I said, are the Sasquatch ET foot soldiers? Maybe. I think that's a distinct possibility, and that they do play a role on Earth. Their role is they're basically keeping an eye on us, and maybe when the ET show up, the Saskies hand them the clipboard and say, here's what Whitey's up to now. It works for me, and they are, in fact, instructed to stay out of sight. And with Bob, we asked, would you ask if we could see one? And Bob's answer was, they say that's a rule, not to be seen. And he reported that the one he intercoursed with said, I have never been seen by people, and I'm not about to start with you people. It is definitely a screw-up when we get seen. It happens, but it's not something that we brag about. Anyway, they do emanate from underground areas, as does the ET stuff, and there's lots of USOs, submerged flying objects and things that seem to suggest that some of this UFO activity does go underground. So there you go. Now, the good news is, if they're already here, we aren't going to be invaded by aliens. I don't care what Tom Cruise movies say. We're good. We don't need Dakota Fanning to save us because they're not going to invade. Why would you invade like your local zoo? You already own it. And that, I think, is kind of analogous. If they're here already, then they're not invading. They're just protecting their investment. And their investment, it might be the earth. It might be us. It might be all of the above. So this Melba Ketchum gal talking about DNA, I talked to her on the phone, really hard person to understand, very thick East Texas accent, but her point is part of the DNA that she's getting from these Sasquatch samples is human, and the other part of the DNA is not. It is something else. And I said, you mean like extraterrestrial? And she said, I'm open to it. I try to be scientific, but it's like not of this earth. So keep your eyes on the DNA thing. It should be fascinating. If her predictions are true, then you get this really weird DNA that does not always match what we expect. And so to summarize, here it is, Charles Fort, as Guy said, but Guy didn't use this quote, the earth is a farm and we're the crop, I like to say. He says we're someone else's property. And this is in the 1930s he's saying this. And to me that makes good sense, but it also harkens to, well, like, what is going on? Does God play into this picture? Well, I was raised a Catholic and we learned about demons and angels, and to me it's kind of consistent with this idea that there's some up here and some down below and the two interact. So all of a sudden maybe it works. And anyway, Lapsaritis gave me this. This is a message from the Sasquatch people right here, and it goes on for 50 chapters. And I will just read you the one statement. We're not giant apes. We're not even related to them, as your cryptozoologists pretend. We are not primitive hominids, nor even related to them, as your anthropologists believe. If you accept our true origin from the star elders and our spiritual wisdom, then you will realize you got it too. We offer you the best opportunity to re-enter a peaceful, spiritual, interspecies relation, to realign with the cosmic order and rejoin our Star Elders Council like your elders did. Oh, I love that. I want that. The Star Elders Council. I am joining. Where do you apply? I will see you people at the Star Elders Council. Thank you very much.